I knew I was in for trouble the moment I saw Dolores Cartwright stomping across my lawn in her orthopedic sandals, gripping a clipboard like it owed her money. She was the self-appointed tyrant of the Maple Creek HOA, an overly aggressive woman in her mid-50s who thought the neighborhood was her personal kingdom, and today, apparently my car was her latest royal offense. "You're in violation." "Lucas," she barked, pointing at my '97 Bronco like it was a dead animal on her porch. "That rugged eyesore is not in line with HOA vehicle guidelines. It attracts vermin. I looked up from changing the oil on my driveway. It's parked in my property. Dolores, and it's registered insured, and not a piece of junk." "What exactly is the violation?" She flipped a page on her clipboard. "It's unsightly. It disrupts uniformity. And don't act like you didn't read the handbook, didn't say anything about trucks," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. "You're just mad because I didn't vote for your pool resurfacing tax hike." That got her face redder than usual, but she didn't say a word, just gave me a tight glare, clicked her pen, and stormed off. I figured that was the end of it. I figured wrong. The next morning, I walked out with my thermos and lunchbox, ready for another 12-hour shift at the plant. That's when I saw it. Mud caked across the hood, smeared along the windshield, splattered like someone had taken a bucket and launched it with a vengeance. And not just regular backyard mud, this was thick, dark, stinking sludge. It looked like it had been scooped out of a drainage ditch. I just stood there stunned. Then I noticed the footprints, size 7 orthopedic saws, leading back across my lawn and onto the sidewalk. And right there, on top of my windshield wiper, was a laminated HOA notice, non-compliant vehicle, final warning. That was it. No more warnings for her. I snapped pictures of everything, mud footprints, the notice, even the sludge that had leaked into my engine bay. Then I walked right back into my house and dialed the non-emergency police line. When Officer Ramirez showed up an hour later, he barely needed convincing. "You said she threw it herself?" he asked, looking at the photos on my phone. "I didn't see her do it," I replied, "but her size shoe, her notice, her vendetta. And check this." My security cam caught her walking past my driveway at 2 a.m. with a plastic tub. His eyebrows rose. "You got footage, crystal clear." He watched the short clip, Dolores in her bathrobe and slippers dragging a Rubbermaid bin across my lawn like she was disposing of a body. "That's criminal mischief," he said, with a nod. "We'll file the report. You want to press charges?" I nodded. "Absolutely." Ramirez looked back at the screen and chuckled. "Ho, or not, she's not above the law," and just like that the gears started turning. What Dolores didn't know was that the HOA wasn't just going to be embarrassed, they were going down with her. By the time the sun set that evening, Dolores Cartwright's muddy stunt had already become neighborhood gossip, not because I told anyone I didn't have to. Word spread naturally after Officer Ramirez spent 20 minutes speaking with me on the front lawn while 2 squad cars idled at the curb lights, swirling quietly. People noticed, curtains twitched, phones lit up. Dolores's reign was no longer a quiet tyranny. It was exposed. The next morning, I returned from work early and found a folded paper wedged into my storm door. No envelope, just a hand-scrawled note on lined paper with jagged handwriting. "You've made a grave mistake. This is bigger than you think. No signature, no name. But I didn't need one." Dolores had never been subtle. I snapped a photo of the note, bagged it in a sandwich Ziploc, and added it to the growing folder labeled HOA Conflict Evidence. I had no intention of backing down. Not now. Not after what I discovered while reviewing the HOA's bylaws. See, Dolores wasn't just flexing her clipboard authority, she was violating her own charter. The bylaws stated that any violation had to be issued by a quorum of the HOA board, not a single individual. Worse, she had no authorization to enter anyone's property, certainly not at 2 o'clock in the morning with a bucket of sludge that turned her from a nuisance into a trespasser. I reached out to an old friend from high school, Jenna. She was now an assistant DA in the county and owed me a favor from a roadside tow I'd given her years back during a snowstorm. She agreed to meet over lunch at a diner off Route 5. She trespassed vandalized personal property and has a pattern of harassment, Jenna asked, flipping through the photos on my phone. And you have footage. Clear as glass, I said, "This isn't just mischief, Luke. If she tampered with your engine, if that sludge caused any mechanical damage, we're looking at criminal property damage. That's a misdemeanor minimum, maybe more." Jenna pulled out her tablet and started typing, "I'll send a formal request to the precinct for the full report. If Ramirez logs the incident properly, we can escalate charges, and the HO..." I asked. She nodded grimly. That's where it gets interesting. If she acted on behalf of the HOA without a vote, she exposes the organization to liability. If she misused funds, like paying for that surveillance drone I heard about last month, that's misappropriation. You might be looking at civil and criminal jurisdiction. I left the diner with a full belly and a clearer path forward. Back home, I set up additional cameras, one above the garage, one tucked beneath the gutter facing the street. Motion-activated night vision enabled all backed up to cloud storage. I wasn't taking any more chances. 2 nights later, something happened that pushed things from petty to dangerous. At around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I pulled up the camera feed and froze. A figure hooded, gloved tall, was standing at the rear of my Bronco. They crouched, fumbled at something near the rear wheel, then ran off into the dark. I rushed outside in my boots and flannel flashlight in hand. Heart pounding. There were 2 large roofing nails placed beneath the rear tires, angled upward, one movement backward, and I'd have shredded both tires. I filed another report. This time, Officer Ramirez brought back up. The second officer, a younger guy named Patel, took the footage seriously. "You think it's her again?" he asked, pointing toward Dolores's house. "She's the only one with a motive," I said, "and she's already been caught once." Patel crouched to examine the nails. "These aren't random. They're placed deliberately." He collected them for evidence, and they left with a copy of the footage. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my recliner with a thermos of coffee and a Louisville Slugger across my lap. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. According to the charter, any member can do so with 72 hours' notice and signatures from at least 5 residents. I had 11 by noon. The meeting was scheduled at the community center, small, beige, and rarely used for anything beyond bake sales and overpriced yoga classes. But that night, it was packed. I stood at the front, folder in hand, while Dolores sat near the back, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line so tight they disappeared. I have reason to believe I began flipping open the folder that the acting HOA president has not only exceeded her authority, but has committed criminal acts in the name of this organization. A few gasps. One neighbor, Mr. Hellman, who always wore suspenders and smelled like menthol, let out a low whistle. I clicked the remote and projected the still from the security footage, Dolores in her bathrobe dragging the bin mud streaking behind her. This occurred 3 nights ago. As of this morning, she is under investigation for vandalism and trespassing. And 2 nights ago, someone attempted to sabotage my vehicle with roofing nails. I clicked again. The next image showed the hooded figure, though hard to identify. The build was unmistakably similar. I have reasons to believe this wasn't random, and that it may be connected to the ongoing hostility stemming from my refusal to comply with the false violation. Notice Murph, one of the board members and a retired firefighter, stood up. "Is this true?" "Dolores?" She didn't answer, because if it is, he continued, "We're all liable. You drag us into a lawsuit into court, and we're the ones holding the bag." "I did what I had to," she said finally. Voice sharp, "We can't let this neighborhood fall apart. You've all seen what's happened since he moved in." "What's happened is you've made up rules," I said, stepping forward, "and now you're caught." Another board member, a soft-spoken woman named Trina, nodded toward me. "You've got evidence. That means we need to take action." Murph turned to Dolores. "Effective immediately. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. You're suspended from all HOA duties pending investigation." Dolores stood abruptly. "You can't do this. I built this community." "No. Trina said, standing as well. You controlled it. That's not the same thing. The vote was unanimous. Dolores stormed out before it was even finished. As everyone filtered out, Murph approached me. She's not going to go quietly. People like her never do. I'm ready, I said. He gave me a solemn nod. Let me know what you need. That night I got a call from Jenna. Charges are moving forward, she said. Ramirez confirmed everything. She's being served with a summon by end of week. I leaned back in my chair watching the screen cycle through the camera feeds. Quiet still for now. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. By Thursday morning, Dolores's house looked different. Her manicured lawn, usually trimmed with obsessive precision, had started to brown along the edges. The porch lights were off. The flag she always kept perfectly centered above the garage had been taken down. Her beige SUV was gone, and no one had seen her since the emergency meeting 3 days earlier. If she was hoping to hide she wasn't doing it well, I didn't care where she was. I cared about what she'd done. That afternoon, I got a call from Jenna again. Her tone wasn't casual this time. Lucas, are you sitting down? I'm leaning against. Close enough? There's more. A lot more. We ran a deeper check into the HOA's financial filings after one of your neighbors submitted a tip to the County Compliance Board. Turns out the HOA's treasury account, the one that's supposed to be used for community maintenance, has been drained by nearly $37,000 over 2 years. The rag I was using to wipe my hands dropped to the floor, drained. How unauthorized reimbursements, fake landscaping invoices, payments to a shell company registered under the name Cartwright Solutions. It's a front, no employees, no address listed, except a P.O. box in her name. I stared out at the street, watching a group of kids ride bikes past the community bulletin board, the one Dolores used to fill with notices about lawn height and garbage schedules. She embezzled from the neighborhood, and she didn't even try to hide it. Well, Jenna said, we've got enough to prosecute for felony. Theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm forwarding the documents to a financial crimes investigator at the state level. She's not just in trouble. Lucas, she's in real danger of prison time. I hung up and walked inside, stunned. She hadn't just been a petty tyrant with a grudge. She'd been robbing every family in Maple Creek while lecturing us about porch colors and mailbox designs. That evening, I knocked on Murph's door. He opened it still, in his work boots and grease-stained jeans. She stole $37,000. I said, possibly more. He didn't blink. We always wondered where the extra dues were going. Every year, she said, the pool repairs ran over budget. But I looked at that pool last summer. Wasn't a crack in it. Jenna's already passing it to the state. I said, but this affects the HOA too. We need to audit the last 3 years. Full records. Murph stepped outside and shut the door behind him. We'll call for a full members' vote. If we get enough signatures, we can dissolve the current charter and reissue, under a new board, clean slate. No more Cartwright legacy. The next day, I walked door to door with a clipboard and a printed statement of the HOA's missing funds. I didn't need to explain much. The moment I said embezzlement, people were already signing. By sunset, I had over 40 names, more than double what was needed. That night, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't Murph or Officer Ramirez. It was a man in a charcoal suit holding a leather folio and wearing a badge on his belt. Behind him stood 2 more agents, both in plain clothes. "Mr. Lucas Grant?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Special Agent Keller, Department of Financial Crimes. We're acting on a referral from the District Attorney's Office. Do you have a moment?" I let them in. They didn't waste time. Keller flipped through a folder and placed several documents on my kitchen table. Dolores Cartwright transferred funds from the HOA's joint account into a personal business account registered in her name. We also have evidence she falsified invoices from non-existent contractors and created fake signatures on board approvals. She forged documents. Keller nodded. At least 7, possibly more. We're also investigating whether she used HOA funds to pay for personal travel expenses. There's a record of a hotel stay in Miami Beach charged to the HOA's debit card. I leaned back in my chair, stunned, and all while she was threatening to fine people for planting the wrong kind of shrubs. Agent Keller didn't laugh. We believe she knew the system well enough to exploit it. Small organizations with weak oversight are easy targets, but the moment someone pushes back, they unravel. I said. He nodded. We'll be arresting her formally within 72 hours. We're coordinating with the county judge to ensure the charges are filed simultaneously, so she can't wiggle out on a technicality. The agents left just before midnight. I stood on my porch for a long time afterward, watching the quiet street lit by the soft glow of porch lights and the hum of late summer crickets. The next morning, I received an email from the Maple Creek Community Oversight Forum, a small watchdog group that had formed barely a year ago after another HOA scandal in a neighboring town. They caught wind of what was happening here through Jenna's office and wanted to assist. They offered resources, legal templates, and even a volunteer accountant who could help track down every dollar Dolores had misused. I forwarded their info to Murph and Trina, who were already organizing a full internal audit. That afternoon, something else happened. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to Dolores's house. 2 men in suits got out, followed by a uniformed officer. They knocked. No answer. After 10 minutes, they returned with a locksmith. By the time the door opened, a small crowd had gathered. Nobody said anything. Everyone just watched. The agents entered, then emerged 10 minutes later with 2 clear evidence bags, one containing a laptop, the other filled with folders. Dolores wasn't home, but they weren't leaving. Empty-handed. That night, Murph called. Found something, he said. One of the board members, Stacy, she checked the HOAs. Outgoing payments from last spring. There was a $10,000 invoice for a drainage improvement project near the park, but no work was ever done. And the contractor listed, turns out it's her nephew, 19 years old, runs a Twitch channel, no construction license. They're all in on it. I said, looks that way. We're pulling everything. Every check, every receipt. Trina's already filed for a temporary freeze on HOA bank accounts. The following morning, I was woken by a knock at my door. Officer Ramirez stood there, his expression grim but satisfied. It's done, he said. We picked her up an hour ago. She tried to leave town. Claimed she was visiting her sister in Arizona. We caught her at the airport with 4 suitcases, her passport, and a burner phone. She always said she hated flying. Guess she changed her mind. He handed me a copy of the official arrest report. It listed charges for grand theft, fraud forgery, and criminal misappropriation of community funds. She's being held without bail until her arraignment. I read the document twice. Then folded it into my drawer. That evening, the neighborhood gathered at the community center again. This time, there were no angry speeches, no raised voices, just quiet unity. Murph stood at the front with Trina and the newly appointed interim board. We're going to do this right, he said. No more secret meetings, no more fines for ridiculous reasons. We're rewriting the charter from scratch. As people nodded and clapped softly, I noticed something strange piece. For the first time since I'd moved into Maple Creek, people weren't looking over their shoulders. They were smiling at one another, talking about cookouts, not citations. Kids rode their bikes past my driveway without their parents calling them back. Nervously, Dolores's house sat dark and empty that night. The porch light was still off. The blinds were drawn, and the clipboard, the one she used to carry like a badge of power, was gone from the mailbox. I didn't just get justice for what she did to my truck, we took back the whole neighborhood. By the following week, the neighborhood had shifted from stunned to galvanized. Where there had once been whispers and silent eye rolling behind hedges, there was now a growing sense of accountability. Everyone had seen what unchecked power could turn into. Dolores Cartwright had ruled through intimidation for years, and now that the curtain had been pulled back, nobody wanted to go back to the way things were. And as it turned out, The mud on my Bronco had been just the beginning of what she'd buried. The interim HOA board, led by Murph and Trina, had launched a full forensic audit with the help of the volunteer accountant from the oversight group. They began combing through every financial record, contractor agreement, and maintenance invoice from the past 5 years. I kept my distance from that process. At first, I figured I'd done my part, and frankly, I had a full-time job to manage. But 3 days into the audit, I got another call from Trina. "There's something you need to see," she said, not bothering with small talk. "It's about the storm drainage fund. I met her and Murph at the community center that night. They had set up folding tables with rows of binders and spreadsheets laid out like evidence at a trial. Trina pushed a sheet toward me, a scanned copy of a check made out to a company called Atlas Runoff Solutions. Dolores authorized this last year. Trina said $22,000, supposedly for an emergency storm water control project. I raised an eyebrow. "We haven't had a flood in over a decade." "Exactly," Muff said. "We called the number on the invoice. Disconnected. We pulled the registration. It's a fake business. No tax ID, no contractor's license, and the address listed is a closed-down dry cleaner in the next town over." Trina added, "We traced the routing number on the check. It leads to a private account under a different name. Eliza Cartwright, her cousin." I said, connecting the dots. She mentioned her once bragged about how she was good with paperwork. "That's not all," M said grimly. "We found 3 more checks, one for a tree trimming service that doesn't exist, one for a community security upgrade, which never happened, and another for a neighborhood beautification consultant, all routed to the same account. That brought the total theft well over $50,000. Jenna, who had been quietly copied on every document, called me the next morning. "This changes the charges," she said without any hesitation. "We're now looking at organized fraud. That's a felony, 3 possibly upgraded further, depending on how the DA wants to pursue it. With multiple false entities and another person involved, it could border on racketeering. Will they charge her cousin too? If they have evidence she knowingly participated. Yes, but we'll need more than a matching last name and a bank account. She helped set up the fake businesses. I said that has to count for something, if we can prove that we can tie it together under a criminal enterprise. This isn't petty theft anymore. Lucas, it's full-blown financial crime." When the charges were amended, Dolores's attorney tried to file a motion to suppress evidence obtained during the audit, claiming that the HOA didn't have the legal authority to conduct a forensic review without a formal court order, but the judge rejected it outright. The HOA's charter explicitly allowed for internal audits when fraud was suspected, and since Dolores had been suspended before the audit began, she couldn't claim board protection. The updated charges included felony misappropriation, criminal impersonation, conspiracy to defraud, and willful destruction of property thanks to the mud incident. Her arraignment was scheduled for the following week, and the courtroom was packed. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because nearly everyone in Maple Creek had something at stake, Dolores's attorney pleaded not guilty on all counts, but the evidence was overwhelming: bank records forged, invoices, fake business filings, and the damning security footage of her trespassing on my property. The prosecutor laid it out methodically, piece by piece, until the judge's expression turned from neutral to visibly annoyed. The trial didn't drag. Dolores's cousin Eliza was arrested. Shortly after the arraignment and under pressure, she flipped. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she provided emails, text messages, and signed documents that directly implicated Dolores in every fake transaction. One of the emails even included Dolores coaching Eliza on how to fill out a forged contractor form. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Guilty on all counts, Dolores was sentenced to 8 years in prison with mandatory restitution of every dollar she stole. The judge also ordered the seizure of her personal assets, including the SUV designer furniture and the savings account she'd quietly opened under a different name. She had spent years acting like she owned the neighborhood. Now she'd be living in a cell with no clipboard, no power, and no audience. Her house was repossessed within 2 months. The new HOA board voted unanimously to turn it into a community center annex where residents could host events, meetings, and classes. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very house she used as a throne would now serve as a place for unity. 2 months after the trial, the neighborhood held its first real block party in years. Kids played tag along the sidewalk. Someone grilled burgers outside my garage. Murph brought his smoker and made ribs that people were still talking about. The next day, Trina set up a table where residents could suggest new bylaws, ones written for the people. By the people I stood near the edge of the crowd, sipping a cold soda, when Murph walked over and nodded toward the old Cartwright house. "Never thought I'd say this," he said, "but I'm glad you parked that Bronco in your driveway." "Why is that?" "It started everything. Most people would have just moved out or ignored it. You didn't. You stood your ground. And now, look at us. I just wanted to change my oil in peace." He laughed, "And you ended up changing the whole neighborhood." As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on, music played from a speaker someone had placed on a lawn chair. There was no clipboard in sight, no fines, no threats, just neighbors finally acting like a community. Again, Dolores hadn't just been removed, she'd been replaced with something stronger, better, and completely out of her reach.